Welcome back to my channel for those of you who are returning, but if you are new, this is your first time, thank you for joining me. And this is going to be a video based around different the different types of Gundam shows. And this is going to be for my new series, Gundam for Beginners, so it's for complete beginners, and I'm going to try my best to go over everything that a beginner would need to know before diving into the shows or any of the model kits or anything like that. So we'll go over a lot of things eventually. This will be a pretty long series, but as of right now, this is what we got, and we're going to go over the different types of Gundam shows. So number one would definitely be the UC timeline, or the Universal Century. This particular show, or this particular part of the franchise, would be shows that take place in the Universal Century. Now, I refer to it as the OG timeline for original Gundam because that's the timeline the original series took place in, and it's the main timeline, or the main series, the main focus. For a long time, it was. So the majority of the old shows are all in the Universal Century, and a lot of OVAs and movies and stuff like that take place in the Universal Century. So if it's pretty old, there's a high chance it takes place in the Universal Century. The last Universal Century TV show was Victory Gundam from 1993. And that, of course, has affected the Universal Century as a whole because they haven't had any full-length shows since 93. It's all been movies or OVAs. So you have to keep that in perspective as well whenever you are wanting to watch the franchise, because you'll eventually get to a point in the Universal Century where you won't have any shows to watch, but you'll have OVAs and TV and movies. Now, there have been TV show versions of OVAs and TV show versions of movies, like the Unicorn has it, and the Origins, it has one as well. But really, there's no point in watching it. It's the same thing. It's just a TV show format, so you'll have more episodes, or you can just watch the movie or OVA and get the full experience in the original form. So really, there's no point in watching the TV show versions unless you want to. Those do have opening themes or intros, and the other shows, the other ones don't. Regardless, that's Universal Century. It has its own timeline because it's the original, and it's the one that most fans say is the best timeline because it's the one that started it all. And without Universal Century, you wouldn't have anything else. And it's my personal favorite timeline as well. But there are a lot of people who don't think it's that great, and they prefer the other types of shows. So really, it's up to you. But I do think it's the best. It primarily focuses on the Zeon and Federation, but eventually it morphs into other factions. The Federation's usually always a constant. Like, they're always there, but they're in different forms, as in, like, they start off really powerful, then they get evened out with the Zeon, and they basically slowly become weaker as the Universal Century continues on. And eventually the Universal Century turns into a different epoch where it's got a different name. So far, there's only one show in that continuation. It's not a very good one, but it still technically is a part of Universal Century. But I'll focus more on that in the second part 2 of this series. But yeah, Universal Century is the one with the original Gundam in it. Is the original OG timeline, and in most people's opinions, is the main timeline. Technically, the real story of Gundam ends with Char's counterattack, but of course, they're going to continue the franchise because it made money. So, even though the main story has technically been over since '89, there's tons of other Universal Century stuff to watch. So, if you want to get into it, go ahead. Just remember, a lot of it's going to be really old, so you have to keep that into perspective whenever you jump into the Universal Century. Now, the second type of Gundam show is going to be AU, or Alternate Universe. It's also referred to by some people as the multiverse. Sometimes I call it that. But if you hear me say multiverse or alternate universe or AU, just know it's the same thing. It's all part of the second type of Gundam show. Now, what was the purpose of this type of show? Well, in the early 90s, Gundam was kind of lost. They didn't really know what to do with it. And they were trying to get a new generation of Gundam fans. And they failed with the F91 movie because it was supposed to be a series, but they only ended up with 13 episodes, and they realized they weren't going to have enough episodes to make this a TV series for the 1990s season of the summer season. And it would have been April. That would have been the deadline for them to create the show. So they just didn't have enough time to do that. And they figured instead of postponing the show and creating more episodes and then releasing it as a full series, that they were just going to make it into a movie. So F91 feels like a compilation film with no show that connects to it. So it's kind of a mess, and it's just kind of all over the place. And while it's an okay movie, it's not great grounds to create a new generation. Or at least I would have said that if Crossbone, the manga, didn't come out and was awesome. But regardless, that's all Universal Century stuff. The problem is that it wasn't, hugely loved, so they tried it again in 93 with Victory Gundam, trying to create a new Gundam for a new generation. But a lot of people who watched it were the old fans, and a lot of the old fans said that the show really wasn't that good because it was just too different from what they believe Universal Century should be. So they basically were like, it felt like I was watching a show called Gundam with Gundams in it, but it had nothing to do with Gundam. They took that idea and basically said, you know what? The fans are right. Let's just do an entire different thing and call it an alternate universe. So in 94, they started with G Gundam. And then this is where you have the alternate universe, and its original purpose, like I said, was to try and get a new generation of Gundam fans into the fold. And they started with the 90s, but then they were like, you know what, with every show, we're going to make it its own thing. And they did that all throughout the 90s with Wing and Gundam X, and then they had Turn A. And then in the 2000s, they finally had a show that they were going to make it definitive that this is the main new series. They were going to make a alternate universe show be the new focus of Gundam because they wanted to basically recreate the success that the Universal Century had with consecutive shows and having a huge story that made it solid. But they realized we need to do something like that, But the best thing to do would be to basically remake the original story. So they basically did that with the Cosmic Era, which is Gundam Seed and Seed Destiny. And for a while, it was supposed to be the the new show, the new focus of the franchise was going to be on the Cosmic Era, and they were like, you know what? Let's basically just remake the Universal Century, but put it in its own timeline, so that this way we could do what we want to the story and characters and suit designs and all that, and there's no backlash from the fans that we changed the Universal Century. This way we can do what we want and it won't affect the original story. So they basically recreated Universal Century, but changing what they wanted to make it feel different and put it in its own timeline. And that's basically what the Cosmic Era is. It's just a remake of the Universal Century. But unfortunately, they ran into problems with the writer. One of them fell sick, and eventually she died. So they didn't continue the Cosmic Era like they wanted to. So they kept having to basically reinvent the wheel and keep trying out new shows. And the success of the anime, of course, is not dictated by how popular it is, by how well the kits sell. And if the kits sell very well, then that shows that they need to create sequels. If the kits kind of sell in the middle, then they just abandon the idea and try out a new show. So basically, the whole point of the second version or the second type of Gundam show is to just keep trying out new ideas until one series does so well that they can't just continue on with a new series. They have to continue it. They have to make more. They have to continue its storyline and make that the focus of the series. Double O did very well, but with the Trailbreaker movie, it basically ended the storyline. So no matter how popular Double O got, there was no way there was going to be any more animes in that world because they finished it. Now they can make animes based off of the mangas, but for the most part, the main story is over. So that kind of defeats the purpose. So basically, the whole point of the second type of show is just to try and bring in new audiences, and they start with something that's self-contained that doesn't have a whole lot of sequels or any, and then bring in those new fans, and eventually hoping those fans would jump over to Universal Century. That's what they hoped. Now, they've been doing this alternate universe stuff for so long that it seems like they just want to focus on alternate universe shows for shows. And that's basically how it's been since 94. Every mainline Gundam series since 94 has been an alternate universe show. So that's not a terrible thing, no, but it definitely shows that they don't really know what to do with the franchise, because they keep hoping that the next series will be the new Universal Century, and the one time they were certain that this is what they were going to do with the franchise and the show was going to focus on Cosmic Era, they had to abandon it because of other reasons. And also the fans quickly fell off and they became less interested. Now, I still think the Cosmic Era is one of the best alternate universes that there are, but everyone has their own opinions. So that's what the second type of show is. It's just an attempt to create a new generation of Gundam fans. So if you go into that era, that type of show, wondering What it's about, that's basically what it is. It was just different attempts to bring in new Gundam fans and hoping they'll eventually jump over to the original timeline or original type of show, which is the first type of show. And just hoping for the best, but expecting the worst, I guess, is what they were basically going for with the second type of Gundam series. But these alternate universe shows have been successful enough to keep the franchise going, so of course they're going to keep making them until one particular one is just so damn popular it takes over the entire franchise, like Universal Century did. But so far, I don't think that's ever going to happen, personally. Anyways, that's the second type of Gundam show, and you can enjoy self-contained series and not have to worry about it being connected to other stories. So it's basically a place for most beginners that they want most beginners to start with, but I definitely don't suggest it. But we'll talk about that in a different part of this series. Anyways, moving on to the last type of Gundam show. So the third type of Gundam show is definitely one that is less confusing, unlike the alternate universe, because this is just simply a spin-offs. These are shows that aren't even alternate universe different. These are so different that they're basically their own thing. This, of course, consists of primarily SD. Now, SD Gundam shows, for those of you who don't know, SD means super deformed, so they look really cute and they're like almost like chibified. And typically it's for kids, but the original SD Gundam was a parody. So it was actually a parody of the original shows, but eventually SD got so popular it basically became its own franchise and has its own stories and has its own lore. And there's like different timelines within the SD spin-off universe. You have the samurai, you have ancient Chinese warrior stuff, kind of like Dynasty Warriors. You have medieval stuff with the knights and stuff, and then you have another type of Gundam or SD Gundam timeline that's like Spec Ops stuff where they all have like tactical gear and things like that. But those are just SD show or timelines and spin-offs. So basically it went from a parody to having its own series of shows that are based in its own lore. So it's kind of funny how it went from one thing to another. But there has been one other parody show that's not a SD, and that would be Gundam Sun, but it still fits within this type of show because this type of Gundam show is for SDs and spin-offs or parodies, I mean. So spin-offs and parodies fall within the third type of Gundam show because it started off as a parody. So it makes perfect sense for it to be here. Now, another type of spin-off that some people would argue and say it's actually an alternate universe series, but it's not. It's simply not. That would be the Build Fighters. Now, the Build Fighters isn't an alternate universe series because there are certain rules to the alternate universe type of show. This would be stuff like taking what the original timeline did, but doing your own thing with it. So basically, you can do stuff like focus your show on new types like Gundam X did, or focus your show on child soldiers like Wing or Double O did, or create a completely different universe, but make it its own thing, like G Gundam did, or Turn A did, or Gundam Seed, or Double O, or not Double O, but Iron Blooded Orphans, or Gundam Age did. They're all their own thing, but they focus it in a reality. But spin off shows, well, in a reality that fits within Gundam's universe. Spin off shows like Build Fighters are more based in our reality, like AD. So, because it's aware that Gundam is a franchise, it's not an alternate universe show, it's a spin-off because it's basically a parody. Now it's a parody that's not straight up haha jokes like Gundam San is or the original SD, but it's more of a fan service series. And that's why it's a spin-off, because not only is it fan servicey and it keeps doing nods to other Gundam shows that are both alternate universe and Universal Century, it's not a alternate universe show. It's a spin-off. So that's why I would put the Build Fighter series here. It's a great spin-off. I absolutely love the Build Fighter shows. I even love the Build Divers shows, honestly, because it feels like a natural progression. Like, this is what would happen in this world if they started battling with Gunpla. They would eventually turn it into an alternate reality game. That's just what would happen. And I can actually see that happening, in 20 years. That if they had the technology to make it happen, that's what the development would turn into. It would turn into a game. So that's what that would be. Personally, it just would. But anyways, that's what it is. The third type of Gundam show is for spin-offs, parodies, and fan servicey shows. Not fan servicey in the typical way anime does it, but in the hey, remember this type of way that you see in I guess you could say like Star Wars, for example, how the sequel series did a lot of nods to the original at the beginning with like The Force Awakens. That's kind of what the Build Fighter series does, but in a more respectful way that doesn't destroy the franchise like The Last Jedi did. Anyways, the point is that it's just for the other stuff that doesn't fit into Universal Century or alternate universe. And for the most part, you can tell if something is a spin-off because it's either incredibly over-the-top, retarded, and goofy, such as a parody would be, or it's focused so much on kids that it has SDs in it, like SD Gundams or the Build Fighters shows, because they have SDs. And that's how I know it's a spinoff. And it belongs in group 3. Because if it's a spinoff, it has SD in it. That's basically how you can identify a spinoff show. But that's what it is. That's the part 3 or type 3. And that's why I labeled it as spinoff and parody. Because that's basically what it consists of. And its main purpose originally was just to be a parody, but it became a spinoff. So it's kind of funny how that happened. But nowadays there's more spinoffs and parodies than there was before, so it needs to be its own thing. And that's what it is. All right. So now you understand the 3 different types of Gundam shows. So, real quick, we're going to have a recap so that you understand more quickly and consistently what the 3 different types of shows are. So, real fast, for a recap. Type 1 of Gundam shows are going to be based in the Universal Century, also known in my own lingo as OG for Original Gundam Timeline. And this is how you know if it's a part of Universal Century, it's a part of Type 1. Type 2 of Gundam show is going to be alternate universe or multiverse. This means its timeline is usually something completely different, like future century or after war or correct century or cosmic era. They all have different names for their timelines, and if they have a different name, that usually means that it's a part of the AU or alternate universe. Except for one show, which is Reconquista NG. It does have a different timeline name, but it technically belongs in a Universal Century, as much as I hate to say that, but that's just how it works. And then, of course, the last type of Gundam show, or Type 3, is spin-off or parodies. This consists of basically stuff that's over-the-top funny and goofy, or is meant to be a kid's show like SD or Build Fighters. Anyways, thank you for watching my video. Please like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell. There will be more videos of this series in the future once I get a chance to make them. And, hopefully the second part of this video this series will also be helpful for beginners. The second, or part 2, is actually going to be about where each show goes. So I'm actually going to go through each one and label them for you so that you know which one goes where. This one was just to explain the different types of shows and why they exist and what their purposes are. So, thank you for watching. Like I said, like and subscribe, and stick around for the next part of this series.